I bet he put it right back out here. Do you want to just set it on the, but right behind your chair? My introduction's a little long, but that's just how it is.
Hey, Kim, is there a stool I can put my beverage on?
All right, you're gonna play that hymn and tell that church story after I introduce you. You're gonna
Yeah.
go straight into playing after
Right,
I
yeah,
read.
I'll introduce it and I'll play and then I'll tell the story.
Okay, perfect. And then here's this is what I have you opening with. I'm gonna say, here's Paul. And then you can play that hymn and talk and then whistling. Great. Well, if we both have our reading glasses.
You just give me the old one too. Don't let me forget my friend, Christine.
Hello and welcome to Sacred Heart Music Center in Duluth, Minnesota for the latest installment of Live from the Heart, Songwriters, Storytellers series. My name is Maya Jensen and I'll be your host this evening. Tonight's live stream is supported by the Minnesota State Arts Board and highlights the finest music talent in the Northland. This monthly series features local songwriters, their creative process, and some stories behind the work. Tonight's guest is Minnesota troubadour Paul Metsa. Paul is a guitar player from the Gritty Iron Range, and he got his first guitar in grade school, and it had a cowboy on it. But this isn't the West, and he's no cowboy. Instead, Paul formed a band on the range, discovered the meters, and those cats rocked all the way to the stars and back. I have fond memories in the 70s of wearing out the grass, dancing the Cats Under the Stars, cranking out Hey Pocky Way at the annual Deer Lake Boogie. Well, Paul left the range and he made his way as a solo artist, starting in Minneapolis, and writing and recording his own songs from the 80s right through the 21st century, with albums that you probably have in your collection: Mississippi Farewell, Whistling Past the Graveyard, Lincoln's Bedroom, Texas in the Twilight, and now, after recent decades spent in those close-knit collaborations playing with Sonny Earl and Willie Walker, he has moved to Duluth to write it all down. Paul is a heartwarming storyteller and a practiced writer, as we have seen. You put your first book out 11 years ago. His prose is like poetry, his poems are like gentle stories, and his songs are like rivers winding through the past. And he is a master of ceremony, a musical tender, a barstool storyteller, and tonight, the man of the hour. We'll hear from the host and creator of the interview radio show Wall of Power as we turn the tables on Paul tonight and he becomes the guest. So if you haven't met Paul Metsa, I hope that after tonight you are inspired to read his musings, to listen to more local music, and to feel that kindred connection of Minnesota musicians that Paul amplifies through all his work. We met his entertaining friends and road-worn influences in his first book, Blue Guitar Highway, 2011. It's coming out in paperback this year, I think, or next year, and now he's co-authored a book called Blood in the Tracks about Dylan. That's coming soon, and we'll hear about that. For Paul, his life in music has been just as much about music as the friends he's made along the way. And he brings all the people and the pups to life in his brand new book, Alphabet Jazz, Stories and Songs, Poetry, Prose, Stories and Songs, released this fall, 2022. So many people and so many songs. And let's begin with the songs. Ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to Paul Metsa.
Thank you. Because this beautiful venue used to be a Catholic church, I think just to even the scale and keep me on the right side of who's ever the supreme commander, I'm going to do an old Episcopalian hymn arrangement by the great John Fahey called "In Christ There Is No East or West." Thank you. Now, I do have to say, for those of you that met me before, I've got you name a town or a place or a thing, and I probably have a story about it. And I was actually a groomsman in a wedding ceremony here in about 1975 or 1976. What was unique about that particular wedding was everything got started and the groom came out and the bride, I think the bride stayed in there. And she stayed in there for 20 minutes. And finally, the priest had to go, and I don't know what the exact transaction was, but I guess she had cold feet. Reminded me of that great Dylan song, if you've never heard it, called "Groom's Still Waiting at the Altar." Anyway, it ended up okay. They got divorced just a few years later, but the rest of the evening, the party at the Hotel Duluth was a ball.
Will you play one more tune, Paul?
Sure.
How about whistling?
Sure.
It's on page 8.
You know, I want to dedicate this. My favorite Bob Dylan line is "Take what you have gathered from coincidence," from his great song "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue," which might be my favorite Dylan song. But as I was getting ready to tune up the guitar and get ready, I was reminded that tonight a fellow who spent a lot of time in Duluth, originally from Barnum, named Monty Lee Wilkes, passed away 7 years ago today. And Monty was a very, very good friend of mine. We became friends again in about 2009, 2010 when he moved back to Minneapolis. He had been on the road for years. He was one of the world's greatest sound engineers. And he got started in Duluth with a bunch of the local rock bands and mixing sound here and in Superior. And went on to work for The Replacements, road managed Nirvana when they had their record Nevermind came out, worked with Alice in Chains, worked his way up into the country world, where he used to say, I basically mixed blonde women with buxom blonde women, we'll leave it at that, and then went on to mix sound for Britney Spears, and would do like 100,000-seat shows in Sao Paulo, Brazil, as the head sound guy. He ended up back in Minneapolis, and we just, everybody knew Monty Lee Wilkes. He was this legendary guy, and man, he was a cat, and they had these Monty raps, and he would just go off. He was a real patriot, but he had a real point of view. So we were sitting around, right around that time when we got to know each other again. He goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I go, "No, actually I don't." And he goes, "My very first gig under my own name, after I put my record out, Paper Tigers, in 1984, I opened up for Taj Mahal at the North Shore Theater." And Monty goes, "Yeah, I was the sound guy." And I'm looking at him now, he's got kind of gray short hair. And so I go to his Facebook page, and there's Monty, beautiful brown locks like Samson down to his belt, all the way down his back. Now I remember you. So anyway, I want to dedicate tonight's performance to the great Monty Lee Wilkes, who went to wherever you go, or to wherever good people go 7 years ago today. And this is an appropriate song for it. This is called "Whistling Past the Graveyard." Eric, just give me a little more vocal on the monitor. Do not play with matches, baby. Matches will start fires. Keep your feet above the flames when you are walking on the wire. Life is sweet, but time is short. Keep your train on the tracks, or when you're whistling past the graveyard, and the graveyard whistles back. Don't forget your mother. She brought you in this world. You are the dream that she once had since she was just a little girl. Send her cards and flowers, and don't step on the cracks, 'cause when you're whistling past the graveyard, and the graveyard whistles back. The world don't owe you nothing, and don't even know your name. You might be a king or queen, but the end is gonna treat you just the same. So drop your crumbs before you leave. Don't cover up your tracks. When you're whistling past the graveyard people, and the graveyard whistles back. You might lose your true love to a stranger in a crowd. Same old story for 1,000 years, but it still makes you cry out loud. But one day she will find that stranger is just a con man in a gunny sack. When she's whistling past the graveyard, and the graveyard whistles back. Go to your confession, read your horoscope, or tell a white lie to a rabbi. Make a collect call to the Pope. 'Cause the same faith that will save you may also break your back. When you're whistling past the graveyard, and the graveyard whistles back. You might be in a wheelchair or have a step so light. Go around the world in 80 days at the speed of light. Because everything that has been given to you will one day be taken back. When you listen past the graveyard, and the graveyard whistles back. When you listen past the graveyard, and the graveyard whistles back. When you listen past the graveyard, and the graveyard whistles play. That's for Monty. Thank you.
Monty made the book here, Alphabet Jazz, page 68. Really a neat story. Well, thanks, Paul.
You're welcome.
So congratulations on embracing the beatnik within.
Yes.
And your new book, Alphabet Jazz, Poetry, Prose, Stories, and Songs. And it reads like a love letter.
It kind of is in a way. I say in the my foreword, Maya, that I started putting all this together when I was getting ready to leave Minneapolis after 40 years. And I had the best of Minneapolis. I lived 20 years in South Minneapolis. Everybody wanted to live south, and I lived right in the heart of it, right off Franklin and Lindale on this little street called Ridgewood Avenue. That was, in the 60s, they used to call it Psychedelic Alley. And it was bordered by 94 on one side and Franklin Avenue, and it was just this really two-block little blocks of wonder. And then I moved out to New York for a while, and then when I moved back, I ended up in Northeast Minneapolis, and I saw Northeast really just, when I moved in there, you couldn't see a band in Northeast that didn't have an accordion. And so I started working with a guy named Jeff Moritko at Mayslack's Bar, and this is like 96, 97, and we brought in a couple of bands that had never played Minneapolis. You might have heard of them. One was called Trampled by Turtles, and then there was a young man that used to drive down. I used to have a little Tuesday night called the Artist's Corner, and I had about $150 to throw on a few bucks and burgers and beers for all the musicians. But this guy would drive down from Duluth, and he looked like a 8th grade geography teacher, and he had this National Steel, and he was just amazing. And so I'd always throw him a little more money. Sometimes I'd throw him some of my money, because he'd drive down just to Duluth to play that young man by the name of Charlie Parr. So I feel good that I was able to get those guys going, at least in the Twin Cities. Of course, they were so good. They became who they are, and we love them to death, right?
You know, right, and I want to, you really have spent a lot of time booking bands and making the show happen.
Yeah, well, it's kind of part of, you know.
Do you have a favorite?
You know, when I was doing a great interview on Highway 61 on KUMD, where, of course, you worked for years, and when I used to drive from Minneapolis, I would time my trip so when I got north of Hinckley on a Saturday, I could tune in John Bushy and Highway 61, and John became a very good friend of mine. So then at Dylan Days last year, Miriam had me on the show, and she does a great job carrying on John's great legacy. And she gave me a really nice introduction, guitar player, songwriter, author, DJ, television show host. She said, "Is there anything I missed?" I said, "Yes, college dropout."
Are you going to go back?
And I just want to say, Maya and I go back. I know she's a young lady, but I was very good friends with her dad, Dave Morton, that we'll talk about a little later. But I knew Maya when she was a young little hippie girl going to grade school with her older daughter, Larkspur. And now I'm honored to be here being interviewed by Maya Jensen, a college professor.
Did you go to UMD?
Huh?
Did you go to college? You went to college, UMD or the Twin Cities campus? Where'd you go?
I went to UMD.
How'd that go?
I'm just going to let people know. I had I picked up a tack. I'm a diabetic. I had a really nasty infection, foot infection. So I got the boot on, and so I've been, it was pretty bad. They said they were happy that I came in because I might not have seen Monday had I not. Thank God my sister Kathy's a retired health nurse who kind of pushed the issue. But so I'm doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy 5 days a week, which means they put you in an oxygen tank 60 feet below the surface. And so my head's really plugged up, so I'm only hearing about 60%. But anyway, yes, I did go to UMD. It's an interesting story. I was going to 2 years of junior college in Virginia, Minnesota. It's called Mesabi State at the time. Junior college, for those of you that went, and you have to be old enough to know what a junior college was essentially high school with ashtrays. And so I went to 2 years of that, and I had a hard time leaving Virginia because I was really close to my grandfather, Emil. And, but it was time. By then I was 20 or 21. And so I was taking classical guitar lessons with a guy named Robert Wander at UMD. And so I went down to Minneapolis because I wanted to get in their music program at the University of Minnesota, more or less to please my parents, really. It was the only thing. And that weekend before, my band, at the time we were called Hot Walleye, after, of course, the great Hot Tuna, our northern take on it. And we ended up, we were playing in Ely, and we got invited to these women to this party that never happened, but went 3 miles through the woods with a flashlight on a portage to end up with just the four of us. Fortunately, the bass player, Skip Millimark, had this pot. I can't even tell you the name because it was, it's profane. I'll give you a part. It was Alaskan Thunder F. And so anyways, I went down Monday. I'm just prefacing the story. That was the pot that kept me out of college, by the way. So I went down to do I took a test, theory test, and the first question was, what is a Neapolitan chord? And I go, I'm screwed. But I passed my playing exam with flying colors, and then about a month later I got a letter that I wish I would have kept to put as the foreword to my book, Blue Guitar Highway, that was published by the University of Minnesota Press, the same university that refused me entrance into their music program, that said, upon reviewing your test scores, we highly recommend, capitalized, those were typewritten letters back then, and that you find another field of study. Well, of course, then 30 years later, they called me up and they wanted me to write about a book about my 30 years of the music business. But what was cool about it, there's a really great rapper, songwriter, singer. She hosts radio shows now, and she just put out a new book named Dessa Darling. Are you hip to her? Check her out. She's phenomenal. So anyway, I went to see her. She did a show with the Minnesota Orchestra, and she was talking about her father, who lived in Duluth, and he made gliders. And his name was Bob Wander. And I'm going to the last I heard of my classical guitar teacher named Robert Wander, he was making canoes. I heard several years later when I asked about it, I go, well, what is a glider but a canoe with wings? So sure enough, Bob Wander, who I'd learned a lot from playing classical guitar, was Dessa's dad. So I can tell you, I live in Duluth now, by the way, in Lincoln Park, and I love this town. I call it Tilt Town, and now there's a flag, the Tilt Town flag, and so I'll be talking about my mom and dad met here, and I can tell you that story later, but next question, Professor. I blame it on LSD. It's really, I can't put a period on a sentence. I don't do it anymore, but I did it a couple times back when Jimmy Carter was in office.
You put a period on a sentence back then?
No, now I do. I used to, and then
Now you don't.
But now I do again, except tonight.
Well, we're a little far from it, but Whistling Past the Graveyard, of course, is the name of an album, and it's a song that's in the book, page 8, and you mention your mother. Don't forget your mother. You are the dream that she once had.
Since she was just a little girl.
Was that you that said every great guitar player is a mama's boy?
I said, my quote now is, every male musician is a mama's boy. And I'm guessing every female artist is a daddy's girl. You are.
It's true, I am.
What do you think? Let's have a...
Is that true?
Do we have a yay or nay on that?
Well, tell us.
I don't care. That's my own point of view.
I want to hear a little bit about Whistling Past the Graveyard and the graveyard whistles back. Tell us a little bit about that song. Where does that come from? And
Well, back in the day, I was doing, between 230 or 300 nights a year in the clubs. I played as a solo on Sundays and a duo on Mondays and then a trio, quartet, and ended up having a big band by the end of the week. But back then in Minneapolis, you could work all the time. So number one, I was able to work all the time and play and study various different types of American music. So, I started out playing folk music with the Pete Seeger songbook, influenced by Bob Dylan. And then when I was in high school, I met Tim O'Keefe. He turned me on to the blues. So I started to get into Brownie McGee and Sonny Terry, and then Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. And then we got into Charlie Parker and jazz and Clifford Brown. And then I moved to Minneapolis, and I had been studying guitar and playing like Leo Kottke. And then I started taking flamenco lessons with the Hauser Brothers. Then we started playing 30s and 40s jazz. I played a little country rock up on the range. And then we got into reggae and New Orleans music. So the one thing I've always, that I've enjoyed about my own approach to my career, I never really necessarily got the brass ring, but I've seen it a few times. I've when Niskanen, the hockey player, when he brought he's playing for the Washington team, and he was from Mountain Iron, and he brought the Stanley Cup in a Flamers bar in Virginia, and everybody drank out of it upside down. Well, I've been able to at least touch that brass ring, but I've been able to learn a lot of different styles of music. So, Whistle Past the Graveyard. I'm home one night, and I turn on the TV, and I'm just mindlessly playing on my guitar. I'm doing this, just like I was doing. Right? Just playing that over and over, watching the news kind of half on, half on. And this was right when they were building the Mall of America, which I refer to in my first book as the Fall of America. And they were interviewing the mayor of Bloomington, and he said, well, yeah, he goes, everybody's going to have this beautiful mall, and he says, but we're the ones that really have to foot the bill and pay the taxes on this thing, because we're the ones whistle past the graveyard. And I'd never heard that phrase before, and I go, man, that's a great phrase. So I'm going, when you're whistling past the graveyard. So I played about 10 minutes, and then it just, like all great lines and great songs, they just come down, you've got your antenna up, and the gods of songwriting go, here you go, Metsa, here's one for you. And I go, when you whistle past the graveyard, and the graveyard whistles back, I go, oh yeah, now I'm off and running. So I just sat down, I probably wrote that thing in 2 hours.
The news, it came from the news.
Yeah.
I love the news. That's great.
But you know what's crazy? I try to live my life honoring my parents. That's my religion, is to be true to the music and to honor your parents. Be a good family member and a good community member. And my mom and dad met right down the street, my mother was going to St. Luke's as a nursing student, and my dad was going to UMD Teachers College. This was in the early 50s. And my dad was a bit of a dog, and he and his buddy Bud Heim would, in the winter when they were chasing girls and women, they'd go from ice rink to ice rink. And they'd go and say, there's no girls here, let's go there. And they'd keep their skates on and get in their car and they'd drive to the next rink. Now this, you gotta remember, this is when the cars had clutches, right? Driving up and down these beautiful hills. So my dad had the number, we'll say her name was Mary. She was a nurse from St. Mary's. So he calls up, 8:30 or so. Yeah, I'd like Mary, please. And my mom was working the switchboard. And she goes, no, Mary's out for the night. And he goes, well, what's your name? And she goes, Bess. And he goes, Bess, my name's Elder. What time do you get up work? She goes, 9. He goes, can I buy you a beer at the Casa de Roma? And she said yes. And it was not when the Casa de Roma, which turned into Whole Foods up there, but it was right down kind of by that the break room. It's now an empty lot. But anyway, that's how Mom and Dad met, and I wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for that phone call. And then when I put out this song, in '92, I recorded it down in Nashville with Bucky Baxter, who was playing with Bob Dylan at the time. And he was in town with Bob Dylan for 5 nights at the Orpheum Theater. And they had a night off, and he got in a cab, and he asked the cab, where's the best music in town? The cab said, well, you gotta go hear this guy Metsa. Tuesday nights at the Five Corners. So Bucky showed up, he caught a set. He goes, man, I really dig your music. I've got a studio in Nashville that he owned with Gary Talent, Bruce Springsteen's bass player. Gave me a really good deal, so I went down and recorded 4 songs. And then the guy, Paul Metsa, in front of me, some money to do the project. I went back and played it for a bunch of friends. I said, you gotta finish this. So I did. So that record came out in '93 or so. Right around that time, my mother discovered she had leukemia. And so she spent a lot of time with blood transfusions and things. But oddly enough, even though the end was just a couple of years away for her, a friend of hers told me that was her favorite song of mine.
Well, and she's in it. What about Dad? I have it marked as one of your favorites, Hey Dad. And is there anything we should know before? Will you read Hey Dad?
Well, it was written by a dog.
Midnight Note from Blackie.
All right, I think most of the story is in here, so I won't even tell you how we got it together. But this is written by Blackie, my first rescue. Hey Dad, Midnight Note from Blackie. Remember the day we met? You and Renee looking for a dog, one that just came up to your knee. At Contented Critters, the animal rescue place that wouldn't kill any of us. I was sent there first from another shelter where I would have ended up on doggy death row. As they said, I was a total head case. A 900-pound pig, a 3-legged horse, a blind turtle, dozens of critters, of things with tails and 4 legs, of stray cats, lots and lots of cats. You'd later refer to this as Dr. Dolittle on LSD. Because you wanted to replace the healing energy that saved your father from death's door. And you had spent 6 weeks, 2 to 3 to 4 days a week, driving up to visit him at St. Mary's Hospital in Duluth, after he fell down a flight of stairs, breaking 3 ribs and puncturing a lung. Not worrying about losing your job, more worried about losing your dad. And he in a coma, wrists and arms swollen, as the booze was trying to leave his veins. And you hoped to God he wouldn't die, because you could never forgive him for ending his last chapter like this, gambling daily at the bar, brandy-stained pull tabs up to his knee. On Chestnut Street, where he grew up above the Roosevelt Bar, as an only child with loving parents, and how proud they would would be of him to see him serve 2 terms as mayor and become one of the best-dressed men in town. His dad, Emil, owned the bar, and Mother Elna ran a rooming house above it. Emil would cash the checks of lumberjacks, holding enough money back so the lumberjacks could take the rest of the money home to their families. After several days of rewarding themselves for those 16-hour days of cutting down birch and pine trees, and sometimes 30 below weather, Elna would wash clothes and feed those in her 16-room hotel, including Steve the Russian, who took a shine to you, and bought you cheese, popcorn, and soda pop in the bar when you visited Grandpa and Grandma. And after selling the bar, moved across Chestnut Street to a small 3-room apartment above another bar, where on sleepovers you'd fall asleep to the blinking neon lights on the street below. Grandma would feed the stray cats in the alley porch, the best-fed alley cats in town, some becoming the size of small mountain lions. And you will always remember when you drove Grandpa down to the hospital in Minneapolis, he with cancer, and you both in Grandma's 68 dark green Dodge Polara. And you drove away, Grandma looked at both of you in a plaid skirt from another time, feeding the cats, then cried, that memory like it was yesterday. And your father went on to marry a princess after meeting her on a blind date in Duluth, born in the shadow of the statue of Paul Bunyan and the Blue Ox in Bemidji, Minnesota. And her relationship with her own father was such that she took a room in a graveyard hotel while in high school and sang in the high school choir and had the voice of an angel. She became a nurse, and how she might have cared for your dad from heaven as she passed 8 years before. And you read newspapers and magazines while visiting Dad, paying special attention to the ads from local humane shelters with pictures of homeless doggies and kitties like me, while you combed Dad's hair and wiped his brow and cut his nails on his perfect typewriter hands, and pasted bits of paper on the hospital room ceiling that said Sisu, the word for God within us all, that actually meant determination beyond all reason, which is what he taught you, John, Jackie, and Kathy. And during that time, you had to remove his wedding ring, a Las Vegas Lucky 7 pinky ring for good luck, and a gold wrist bracelet to keep the pressure off his hands so his wrists didn't explode. And while reading the humane shelter ads, you made a promise to the universe that if Dad recovers, you will adopt a dog that came up to your knee to transfer the healing power that saved your dad. And recovery did, and this is where I come in. So you and Renee drive up to Contented Critters in Mackinac, Minnesota. You peruse the 35 or so dogs. They're mostly larger hunting dogs abandoned by hunters when they got told to hunt. Abandoned by hunters when they got told to hunt. By the way, fuck those guys. You didn't really see any dogs that would work as they were all too big. And asked Renee to get your checkbook so you could leave a donation. So then as you were leaving, I barked loudly, in fact, louder than I've ever barked. And you asked Walt, caretaker of all of us, who the hell is that? And he said, that's Blackie, but he has issues. Well, who the good goddamn doesn't? Of course I did. Taken as a pup from a deadly shelter, then to Contented Critters, where Farm Family adopted me immediately. As you noticed right off the bat, I am one good-looking SOB. That kept me on a damn leash 24/7 and fed me when they remembered. And of course, I chewed through the leash, ran like hell into the frozen woods for a damn year amidst the balsam and the pine. And I chewed the grass when the snow melted, broke my tooth on a rock. And when the snow melted and the ice disappeared from the rivers, I then drank that. And I shit under pine trees, behind rocks, and far enough away so the goddamn wolves and whatever else would never smell me or find me. and I left, as I still do, the rest of the animals alone. And I remember when my bark brought you to my cell hellhole cage, you were ready to leave, I know you were, and my eyes burst forth like German submarines, eyeing the American merchant marine. And my ears pinned back like some pit bull from hell, because I had to. And Renee opened the cage and I walked out and she said, "You don't look so tough." And I wasn't really, just determined, and sat on my haunches, right ear up, left ear down, like you tell the story, like the flying nun. So for $65, I was yours to be picked up in 2 weeks, and then you got me and got your dad as well. He to a hospital in northern Minnesota. You walk him out of the hospital at 6 feet tall and 103 pounds and not being able to write his name or walk or talk. And you took him in a van from Northern Transportation. Your dad turned gray and about to pass out. You saw it was time to turn on the oxygen, which the farewell nurse forgot to do. The little things these nurses forget to do, your mother being one, just about the time they stopped wearing those three-pointed hats. With pins and bright white uniforms, Napoleon would approve. And he got home to cook, and so did I, to the warmth of your Northeast home. Your dad would continue his recovery at half nursing home, half home hospital. And you left me with Renee to go visit Dad, all by my doggy lonesome. After her brother, who was living with her, came home from work, I saw an opening and I ran out of the house. And now I was lost in the urban jungle in South Minneapolis for 3 days and 3 cold nights before I was hit by one, maybe 2 cars at 44th in Chicago, one hell of a busy intersection. And one big black angel walking his tiny dog slowly scraped me to the side of that street, and he held me and he called animal rescue. And they came and they called you too, and you cried, never being able to excuse yourself if I never came back. But I crying, I think perhaps a tear or two of joy. And there I was at the Golden Valley Emergency Vet. Golden Valley, which Steinbeck said in Travels with Charlie, is neither golden nor a valley. And there I was. They took me out on a colorless blanket, knocked out like Sonny Liston, but breathing like a baby child. And the doctor said, "Give me your credit card and call me in the morning." And you did, and came to see me, now in an oxygen tank, fat lip, busted back end and all. And I saw you and Renee, and though we only had known each other for a couple of weeks, I saw my daddy's eyes, and one ear went up and one went down. You made good on your promise and told the doctor to work his magic. And then I remember when I wrote my first Christmas card and told the tale, how my magic bark caught your ear and our innocent souls began to meld. You covered your bedroom in plastic, my blankie and pillow by your bed, dragging my ass around, and you took me out every morning to do my business. We'd sit together on the back porch, enjoying the autumn morning sunlight. And after a while, I tried to stand day after day, and I tried and tried, fell on my ass time and time again. And that day when I wobbled, bucked up, and finally stood on all fours, that was a glorious day for both of us, wasn't it? The first time I saw you cry, and I shed a few tears myself. The kind of thing you don't read in the Bible, but probably should. And I did not bark in your house, now my house, until after Christmas, surprising the holy hell out of you. And while you adopted me to transfer the healing energy of your dad's recovery, and instead, I did a canine reenactment of your dad's accident. Well, blame that on the twisted logic and humor of the universe. Like you humans say, shit happens. But your dad and me really bonded as survivors, and now you had another story to tell. And that was the beginning of a 16-year glory ride. Your buddy Terry Carlson said I'd light up any room I'd walk in. And that's why I hope I will be remembered. Somebody needs to write that story, and while we're at it, could I have a few more treats? And the letter ended, price of adoption, $65. Price of emergency vet in Golden Valley, $1,200. Price of view of University of Minnesota Vet Hospital and Intensive Care, $3,600. Price of Minnesota's second best folk singer, Take Me Out at 6 a.m. and Hold Me Up While I Poop, priceless. Merry Christmas, your $5,000 alarm clock, Blackie. P.S. and yes, maybe I picked you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Blackie has passed. Blackie has passed.
Yes, and he is, and it's the whole story's in the book. His last few weeks are all in there. But I promised him when we'd sit on that back porch and he couldn't get up and we'd have our coffee and he'd get a little sunlight. And he was in his diaper, doggy diaper. I told him, I said, you know, there will come a time when we'll have to part, but I will never keep you around in pain for my own satisfaction. I will find a beautiful pine tree at our cabin next to Lake Vermilion, where I will lay you to rest, and that's where he is.
And your dad has passed.
My dad passed as well, yeah.
Well, I thought maybe we could have a song. Maybe Virginia, since your dad was mayor for how many years?
My dad was mayor for 2 years. Was really a great American. I talk a lot about America, and that's how I view America, which I love dearly, and disagree with a lot of things over the years, but I really believe in the basis of this country, and it's a democracy, as we found out, certainly in these last elections. It's a work in progress, and you do have to work on it. But my dad, who was born at the Metsa homestead on the New Year's Eve, January 31st, New Year's Eve day, he was born, and then they moved to Orr and then to Virginia, and grew up above a bar as an only child, and ended up serving on the school board for 2 or 3 terms, city council, and 2 terms as mayor, and it's always been, for me, that's an American success story. And then he ended up in a senior, I wouldn't call it a nursing home, a senior citizen center in Cook, Minnesota. I call it the senior high rise. It was 3 stories, and with Maya's dad, Dave, and Dave was. We could talk about Dave a little later on, but anyway, it was a beautiful way where 2 people with American journeys. One, who grew up, was born in 1928, came up through the Depression, the Second World War, and then Maya's dad, Dave, was born in 1941 and came up a little bit through the Second World War, but the Eisenhower years, and then became really one of the leading lights of the counterculture. How they ended up later in life together, both their disparate American journeys worked, and now they spent the last several years watching out for one another.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful American story.
How about a song? Virginia?
Yeah, that sounds good. You know, it's funny, I've played so many bars and saloons and blood buckets and bone orchards in my life. When I actually play a beautiful concert hall, which I've done quite a few times in my life too, I get a little nervous. I keep waiting for like a fight to break out, a beer bottle to break, or a Harley Davidson to start up. So, but I'm digging the quiet. Okay, I'm going to play this one too. I play a fingerstyle guitar, and I also play with a plectrum. And I'm going to play this one and send this one out to Robert Wander. And this is, I'll play this fingerstyle song I wrote a while back called Virginia. Living down on trees on Fifth Avenue, shine at the fireball lane. Nobody's on the beat, going 2 by 2. Nighthawks, they're running the night. Black trucks are broken over the train tracks, they still go downtown. Plug nickel accordion band. Kissing boys, kissing girls right down on the hoodoo roll. Jack Rabbit kicked the can. Jack Rabbit kicked the can. Virginia, Virginia, don't even know my name. Virginia, Virginia, nothing changes when you do not feel the same. Nothing changes, do not feel the same. Tinfoil teardrops rose for the meter man. Pool house police play my peg. Horseshoe hopes, loan from the bleeding hand. 4 scores later, just like Lincoln said. Boris the Dipper used to tell me Russian fairy tales in a blackwood sky, no satellite. Fireplace keeps the photos down beneath the Chippendale. No one's gonna sing and sleep at night. No one's gonna sing and sleep at night. Virginia, Virginia, don't even know my name. Virginia, Virginia, nothing changes, but do you not feel the same? Nothing changes, do not feel the same. Gabriel's trumpet, Johnny's saxophone, Southside pinball mercy plea. Under the pines, my baby said, let's pretend it's Paris. She dropped me down on my knees. Old dogs, they lie right behind broken doorways. Mandolin bones and candlelight. Last chance wind blows cold sometimes from 4 ways. No one's gonna sing you to sleep at night. No one's gonna sing you to sleep at night. Virginia, Virginia. Virginia, Virginia. Nothing changes, but you do not feel the same. Nothing changes, we do not feel the same. nothing changes. But you do not feel the same. Thank you.
We have Jack Ruby, the Jack Ruby video up next.
Let's watch the Jack Ruby video. Do you want me to introduce?
Basement floor of the Dallas City Hall, and that's a scuffle on the basement floor. It seems to concern the park.
Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Whoever taught you to shoot a pistol like that? Oh, you snuck in the basement and you stood in the back. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Jack Ruby, you were 15 years old. On the south side of Chicago, you looked up to Capone. Stole girls' lunch money, beat boys on the way home. Jack Ruby, you were 15 years old. Jack Ruby, when you were 21, oh, you traded brass knuckles for a caliber gun. In the Sherman Hotel, bootleg whiskey did run. Jack Ruby, when you were 21. Jack Ruby, when you were 35, set up shop in Dallas, you had nothing to hide. A nightclub of hookers in cops side by side. Jack Ruby, when you were 35. Jack Ruby, when you were 49. From the Carousel Club, you kept the judges in line. J. Edgar Hoover said there's no organized crime. Jack Ruby, when you were 49. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Whoever taught you to shoot a pistol like that? Well, you snuck in the basement and you stood in the back. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Did the Kingfish in New Orleans give you the key? The men you should contact and the men you should see. A Confederate cloak of conspiracy with an eye towards November 1963. When the motorcade turned on Houston and Elm and into the crossfire where Camelot fell, with the shots from the Bush's 6th floor window well, the Indy lit past more than 3 empty shades. Was Lee Harvey Oswald the only one? One of those in the bushes who started to run? With Secret Service credentials and government guns? Oh, they'd answer no questions about what they had done. Oswald was set up, so he did say, before he appeared in the basement driveway. In on live television, Ruby blew him away. Well, Godspeed the witness with something to say. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Whoever taught you to shoot a pistol like that? Oh, you snuck in the basement and you stood in the back. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Jack Ruby, when you were 64, you told Dorothy Kilgallen they could even the score. from your jail cell, gave names and numbers and more. In 48 hours, she lay dead on the floor. Jack Ruby, come back from the grave. Tell it for real, whose lives you would save, and the powers behind the deals that were made. How a president's murder became your stock in trade. Well, those who are guilty are alive to this day. They got their visas in D.C. and they got away. Others laid low until election day. It was a day of high treason and a quick getaway. Well, did the Warren Commission mean what they say, or did the mob or oil money get in the way? Did the shadow of Cuba darken the day? In Dallas County, the land of LBJ. In Dallas County, the land of LBJ. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Whoever taught you to shoot a pistol like that? Well, you snuck in the basement and you stood in the back. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Whoever taught you to shoot a pistol like that? Well, you snuck in the basement and you stood in the back. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat. Jack Ruby in a Kavanaugh hat.
Jack Ruby. Well, Paul, I want to acknowledge your strong Minnesota DFL support over the years, whether, and Wellstone garnering mentions in the book, and of course, Jack Ruby. And I want you to just tell us a little about, where does that come from, and losing JFK and Wellstone. Those are deep cuts and deep scars, and you were a kid when JFK.
Well, I imagine a lot of us are relatively the same age over here. We can remember that horrific days in '63 when JFK was assassinated. And it was the first time I was, 7th, south side of Virginia, 2nd grade. And it was the first time that the concept of, I'd heard the word evil, but the concept of evil actually became apparent and real in my life as a young little boy. And I remember a couple days later, my mother and I were watching our old yellow wooden Sylvania television when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald, which, mind-blowing, really historically probably the first, what we now call reality television. And so that's always, been imprinted in my brain. But I always found a fascination with the name Jack Ruby because it's very poetic, rubies, diamonds, and the whole thing. So it was this real yin and yang concept of the name Jack Ruby. And of course, then you had the Warren Commission and then all the other varying theories, and I was very interested in all of that. I bought books. I've been to Dealey Plaza twice, and I always thought somewhere in the back of my mind, there's a song called Jack Ruby. And I grew up playing folk songs, John Hardy and John Henry and Jack Ruby, right? It's like makes perfect sense to young Paul. And so one day in about 1992, I was reading the newspaper, and there was an article how Jack Ruby, whose real name was Jack Rubenstein, his brother was selling us some artifacts to pay off a tax lien, including his Kavanaugh hat. And once again, the antenna was up. Songwriting God of the universe goes, okay, Metsa, you ready? You got your pen and paper and your guitar? Here it comes. It came to me just this quick. Jack Ruby, and a Kavanaugh hat. Whoever taught you to shoot a pistol like that? You stuck in the basement, you stood in the back, Jack Ruby, and a Kavanaugh hat. So boom, I had the chorus. And so, it was, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night, I had about 15 or 16, maybe 20 different JFK assassination books. I put them all out on the floor of this third floor mansion, great old mansion I was living in with an 85-year-old landlady named Babe, who always had for breakfast oatmeal and a banana. She lived to be 95. There's a lesson for that for all of us. And when you go in at night, this place was built by, the mansion was built by Sumner McKnight, the McKnight Foundation. And she had these reel-to-reel tapes of her brother playing an organ, and she'd play them when I'm stumbling home from wherever I'm coming from. Not always stumbling when I'm coming home from gigs, but when I'm coming home at night, it'd be 2 in the morning. Babe would be up playing these reel-to-reel tapes. It was like freaking Boris Karloff when you walked into that apartment. But anyway, so I wrote about 12 or 13 verses, and then I was stuck on one line, so I was very good friends with David Carr, who became one of the best columnists the New York Times ever had. And so I called him in the morning. I said, I got stuck in the line. He goes, stock and trade. So the stock and trade line of there came from David Carr. So I wrote it and recorded it not much later. And then in '93, my friend Tom Arnold, the comedian, had married Roseanne Barr. And back then, there's more in my book, Blue Guitar Highway, which is coming out next spring, about Arnold and David Carr and myself in the 80s. Or just go to any bar in Minneapolis and talk to an old bartender and he'll tell you stories about us. But so Tom and Roseanne were being the MCs for Farm Aid in 1993, March 14th. And I had written a song and recorded it called Ferris Wheels on the Farm. And so I sent the single down to Tom to get to Willie. Willie probably saw it, rolled a joint on it, and said, well, he's a friend of Tom's, let's have it. So I came down, I was supposed to sing that song and my song, Slow Justice, but I asked myself a question that I do a lot when I come with these big quandaries in life. What would Woody Guthrie do? So I got up that day in front of 20,000 Texans just miles away from Dealey Plaza and debuted my song, Jack Ruby, in front of 20,000 unsuspecting Texans, and I lived to tell the story.
You've spent a lot of time in Texas.
Yeah, I played Nosta quite a bit.
Well, I thought we would turn to Dylan. He makes quite a showing in alphabet jazz, no surprise. And in fact, people call you, the other folk singer from the Iron Range.
Great folk singer, but anyway.
And
there's a great new review that just came out yesterday in the Soundwaves magazine. It's a music and entertainment publication from Connecticut. The guy gave me a really nice review of my book, Blue Guitar Highway. And he got back in this whole second Dylan in Minnesota, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of the last thing you want to be called, because most of the people that were the second Dylan, it's like, where are they now? Right? But I'm happy to be compared to him because, he's I just adore the guy.
Well, it's kind of
he's like these stone Iron Ranger, man. How can you not love your fellow Iron Rangers?
It was kind of a joke at the radio station. We'd get a lot of albums, and it would say, sounds like Dylan.
Dylan-esque.
There's a piece about the 60-year bash. There's too many trips down memory lane. Do you want to read Dylan, Still a Hepcat, or do you want me to read it?
Why don't you read it? This was a...
letter to the editor.
Yeah, so Dylan did 5 nights at the Orpheum Theater, which he owned for a while with his brother David. He had since sold it. And so he was doing 5 nights, and that was the run that I met Bucky Baxter. And so City Pages or Twin Cities Read, I can't remember, a guy named Burl Gilliard, who turned out to be a good buddy of mine, wrote this article, and the freaking headline, "The week Dylan's playing in Minneapolis," says, "Should this man be euthanized?" And I'm going, are you freaking kidding me? America's greatest songwriter who went from the Iron Range to Minneapolis and New York City. This is how you're going to welcome him to town? So this was a letter I wrote to Burl, to
Right.
the letter to the editor.
To City Pages, 1992. Although Bob Dylan certainly needs no one to defend him, I still take issue with Burl Ives Gilliard's showing musings and cavalier dismissal of the modern Jewish troubadour. His story, The Traveling Wilbury, contained a series of cheap shots typical of the most quasi-hip channel-surfing music critic. He hastily concluded Dylan's forte is not live performances after seeing him at the Metrodome and Riverfest. These formats are akin to seeing a Boris Spaxy chess demonstration at the Mall of America. Who wouldn't be a bit shaken by being trapped in a Teflon prison of 50,000 acid-soaked deadheads with the acoustics of your basic air hangar? And Riverfest, well, will be Riverfest, whether it's Dylan or MTV or an MTV track show. His forte is the 2,000 to 3,000 seat theater where the subtleties of a performance can come out. Surely, Dylan may not be as prolific in his later years as he was during his initial creative surge, but to dismiss anything after Blood on the Tracks is completely balderdash. Dylan is both an experiment and testament to whether rock and roll will survive middle age. Though not always graceful, I believe you either accept rock and roll as a viable, breathing, evolving form of American music, or you don't. Embarrassingly, Gilliard asks the sniveling question, why bother? Could it be perhaps the man just likes to play, and it also happens to be how he makes his living? Whether writing more than 500 songs, destroying Tin Pan Alley, creating an entirely new form of the American popular song, and perhaps changing America in the process. Maybe we could give Dylan both the respect and the benefit of the doubt. Let him strap on his Stratocaster and let him play whatever he likes. You don't have to see God, and it doesn't have to change your life. But what's wrong with luxuriating in the power of pure poetry with a cat who obviously born to rock and roll and still does? Letter to the editor. Nice letter, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you. You know, it's been, I just want to jump, it's been one of my fortes. I love, part of this book, what I love doing it, I write in a variety of styles. I can't say I've mastered any of them, but it's my poetry, it's my song lyrics, it's my prose, and it's my stories. And I'm very proud of it. There's a lot of love and a lot of truth in this book. But letters to the editor are one of my fortes. It's like if you can get a quick, it's like being a boxer. You get a 1, 2, 3 punch in, right? 2 or 3 sentences, you've done your job, and you get the hell out of there. Now, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, which has been the recipient of several of these letters and printed quite a few of theirs, it can work the other way as well. So back in about 2001, when I heard that the Walker Arts Center was going to tear down the Guthrie Theater, the Temple of Light and Sound, and also the masterpiece of Ralph Rapson, one of the world's most foremost modernist architects who's lived his whole life in Minneapolis. I went on a crusade, 7-year crusade, and a lot of this is in my book, and the chapter Slings and Arrows on Blue Guitar Highway. But I went on this 7-year crusade to save the Guthrie Theater, and we were a little ad hoc group, and we were against the strongest, most powerful people in town, but we gave it a good fight, and I know Ralph really appreciated the work we put into it. It meant a lot to him when he went to the first city council meeting where I first met him after starting the room. And somebody on the city council asked, well, how would it feel when they tear down the Guthrie Theater? He said it will be like losing a child. And I had played there 7 times. And you sounded like, not only were you in the center of what sounded like the world's largest acoustic guitar, but you were standing in the same place that Howlin' Wolf, Miles Davis, The Temptations, Patti Smith, Bruce Springsteen, Allen Ginsberg, and the rest stood at. You were right there, like I'm sitting right here, right there. And for me, it's as great as art, great as life, great as music gets. So anyway, we did a benefit for R.T. Rybeck, who was running for mayor. And we brought him to Maze-Lac, so I brought in the Turtles and Trampled by Turtles and Charlie Parr. And we did a benefit for him. Then we did another benefit for him. And then when he finally got elected, during these benefits we did, he said, yeah, I'm really for saving the Guthrie. And then when he got elected, he goes, no, that train has left the station. So one night, I come home from a gig, I read this in the paper where the new mayor, R.T. Rybeck, wants to tear down the Guthrie Theater. And so I had a couple of cocktails at the gig, and I had a little Southern Comfort in the cabinet. And I pour myself a couple of shots of Southern Comfort, and I write a letter now to my friend Doug Groh, who writes the community culture column for the Star Tribune. I just fire off a little letter to him on the computer, and I'm going to preface this by saying we've all done it, and you can't steal this because we're being taped, but I want a little mechanism on my computer that if I write something after midnight, it won't send until 9 a.m. So you get a chance to come and reread it. Well, I didn't have it that night, and the night, so I go to bed. I write this little piece to Doug Groh. Next morning, about 10 o'clock, I get a call from a buddy of mine, Danny Bell, who was the maitre d' at Nice Polonaise room where I was working at the time. He goes, whatever you need, I'm here to support you. You want me to raise money? I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, you're running for mayor against R.T. Rybeck. He goes, go get the morning paper. That's why you got to have the machine that keeps the emails until 9 a.m. Anyway.
I just want to hear about when you moved to Duluth, where did you land?
Well, it's funny. I always wanted to move to Duluth because I've had, we used to come down here as a kid from Virginia, Minnesota, the Iron Range, go to the, what was it called, City Lights Parade. What do you guys have on Christmas time?
Oh, Bentleyville.
Yeah.
Oh,
the parade.
The Christmas City of the North parade.
Yeah. So we'd come down for that. Then we would come down. A big thing was to go to the Duluth Armory, which I'm glad my friend Nelson French and Mark Poirier are saving to see the Home and Boat Show. I saw Dick Contino, this really buff, Elvis-looking accordion player. He was macho as hell. I loved it. He was also a big influence on Roy Batan, Springsteen's piano player that I've read about later. I saw George Goebel, great comedian, guitar player. And then I won my band Damn Everything But the Circus, won the WEBC Duluth Battle of the Bands in 1974 at the Duluth Armory. And then I did my big gig in 1984. But I've been coming down here and I met so many people. So pandemic, no work in Minneapolis, et cetera, I had purchased a duplex that accumulated in wealth. I was sitting around by myself on Christmas. I said, what's your house worth? So I plugged in my address and it came up with this number. I go, boy, I like that number. I think it's time to move to Duluth. So one thing led to another, and I ended up living for the first year because I knew Bill Pagel, the landlord. I ended up renting the first floor of Bob Dylan's childhood home right around the corner there at 517 North 3rd Avenue East. And it was a great way to land in Duluth. and I met her. She helped me move in, Christine. She's got a mafia of women that you got to keep your eye on.
Well, there's a lot of characters and a lot of musicians that make the book. Some from Minneapolis, some from your travels around the United States, and then some from the Iron Range where it all began, including the stories about Bob. There's his friends. There's Keegan and of course Dave Morton.
Dave Morton, let's talk about your dad for a sec, Maya.
He was a piece of work. He had a lot of crazy West Coast gig stories and a lot of stories about the
Give me
characters.
just the beginning of that chapter. I just wanted to, if I read just the first chapter.
Just this first page, maybe. Why don't you just start? I met Dave Morton here.
Yeah.
It's right around here. I met Dave Morton. Imagine that. One time you went to work like a real job.
Oh yeah. He was one of the hardest working guy I knew.
Well, he retired when he was 19, and then Mom said, "You really got to get a job." He was 36, so he did.
There's gaps in life and things like that. Okay, so this is a Dave Morton tribute. Dave Morton was an early influence on Bob Dylan. In fact, what I still think is one of the greatest Bob Dylan biographies by Robert Shelton that was written 40-some years ago. It introduces Dave Morton in the early chapters about when Dylan went to Dinkytown. It said, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And it was about Bob Dylan, about Dave Morton's influence on Bob Zimmerman at the time. So my chapter is Dave Morton, a tribute. When another student was ready, the teacher reappeared. Dave Morton was an American original. He was a natural mystic, an artist, poet, musician, songwriter, band leader, performance artist, visionary, and a beatnik to his core. He was also a family man toward the last 30 years of his working life, a construction worker specializing in laying cement. Whatever station in life he found himself in, he inspired those around him to lead a more meaningful life. And like the jazz man that he was, improvised it all along the way. A gentler man I have never met. And then I go on to talk about Dave. I met Dave, quick story, I tell it here. In 1976, I get a job working construction. Now I had been, I'd been a canoe guide, a radio DJ, but I'd never been a freaking hardcore construction worker. So Dad pulls a few strings because my cousin Tony was a union foreman. He got me on the gig. So I go out to Forbes, Minnesota, ABI Contracting. I have this long blonde hair and a bright blue construction helmet, marking me as new guy on the job, fresh lamb to the slaughter. And I get on the bus to go out to the work site. And there's guys, back then there was 16,000 people living in Virginia and the surrounding areas, a town of 10,000, because it was the last major construction boom. So I'm on there, and these big guys, and they're tattooed, and they're all hung over. You walk in, you smell Jack Daniels and beer all the way up the aisles, and they have these huge lunch pails because they're professionals, they're lifers. That lunch, that 45 minutes for lunch is key. So I walk in, I go, I'm screwed. This just ain't my scene. But I was committed, and so I look in the back of the bus, and there's this really skinny guy with this beat-up helmet on and this long, I remember he had a yellow shirt of some sort, this long handlebar mustache, and he was holding a Munster's lunch bucket, right? A kid's Munster's, and I go, that's my guy. That's my That's my key here. So I ended up, which was Maya's dad, Dave Morton, I ended up on a cement pour with them later that day, and we started talking, and it didn't get long into it before he goes, yeah, I was living in San Francisco with my band, the Juke Savages, and we did Halloween at the Fillmore West, and we rolled Janis Joplin out of a carpet that we rolled her in backstage, and I go, I think I'm gonna like this guy. Turned out to be the Morton family farm where Maya grew up was only a mile from the original Metsa homestead, and for years he took care of my Aunt Lil, who was one of the last Metsas that lived there. So, but let me just read the last paragraph. I talked about it. So anyway, my dad and Dave ended up in the same high-rise in Cook, Minnesota, with a bunch of other very nice people. And my dad developed a little bit of a gambling Jones, spent a little too much of my inheritance at Fortune Bay Casino with my brother and sisters, but it was his money, whatever. And my dad ate like a bird, 6 feet tall, 140 pounds, but would always bring home food and share it with Dave. So anyway, this is the chapter called Last Thanksgiving with Dad. So I read you the first paragraph. Here's the last couple. I enjoyed that Dave and Dad lived just one floor apart, enjoying the fruits of their life and labors in a senior home with others like them. Not a bad way to take that last ride home. When I ponder what America's meant to me, I most enjoy all the opportunities and avenues this country has afforded us. I look back at both Dad's and Dave's generations, at once at loggerheads, and wonder which generation won. They made their mistakes as I have mine, but at the end of this American day, I look at both of their generations as breaking stone cold even. Both journeys and paths worked, and that, my friends, is the beauty of America.
It's stories like this that makes this book so delightful. That just pulls you through the reviews. There's reviews on the back, and it's really fun that you keep sharing them on social media, that we get to kind of hear what people's perceptions of all these people and stories and songs and poems. We have just a few minutes, and I just want to tell everybody that they can get Alphabet Jazz on Amazon, but also it's kind of digging through and looking at which ones have that Twin Ports resonance, and I thought maybe you would share a little bit about Molly's, because we will hear that song.
Christmas at Molly's.
Right.
How many people here remember Molly's Bar in Superior? I can't see any of you. Christine, of course, you remember every bar in Superior, but...
I don't remember any of the bars in Superior.
So let me tell you a little story about Molly's Bar before we hear the song. When I started playing here in '84, opening up for Taj Mahal at the North Shore Theater. Let me tell a little bit about that story. So I opened up for Taj, who is a hero of mine. I mean, musicians of my generation, the musicians like Taj Mahal, Bonnie Raitt, Ry Cooder, John Hammond, and the rest grew up to listen to and playing with Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Memphis Minnie, Victoria Spivey, and the rest. Musicians my age, we learned about those deep Southern musicians, Detroit musicians, New York musicians, from Taj Mahal, and Ry Cooder, and Bonnie Raitt, and the rest. So when I opened up for Taj Mahal, it was a big deal because I was a bow down fan to Taj, still am. So I do my set at the North Shore Theater, where my mother took myself and my friends when we were 13 to see The Sound of Music. So I had that connection, and I'm so glad that they rehabbed the North Shore Theater is just, but Patty McNulty was the prime mover. Patty, if you're out there, God bless you, and Duke Scourge for keeping that flame alive, and it's so beautiful. Anyway, so Tosh gets done with his show. He plays like 2 hours and 20 minutes. My good friend, and Tosh's good friend, Dave Snaker Ray, who's a good friend of your dad's, was playing next door. There's a little cafe. Tosh goes and sits in with Dave for his last set. Then we ended up with John Ward and Lisa Hatton, two great Duluth musicians who had a party at their house not too far from here. So now we're playing, all of us are playing, and I'm sitting around playing with Taj Mahal. And I taught him some new verses to Venerio, I remember that. Finally, it's about 3:30 in the morning, and Taj has been playing like, what, 6 hours now? And I remember Taj had a pin that said 40 and feeling sexy. And I should have a pin tonight that says 67 and barely got here. But I'm feeling good, people. And for my legs getting better, everything's good. But anyway, so where was I going with this?
Molly's?
Yeah, Molly, right. So no periods at the end of the sentences. I told you that earlier. So anyway, I started playing in Duluth. I opened up with my good friends Tim Nelson and Rod Raymond. I was the first guy to play at Fitker's Brew House in whenever the hell that opened. But it's about like 26 years ago. Do the math, figure that out.
You were 12.
Yeah, I was 12. So anyway, you were 12. So anyway, when we get done, Superior was always open until 2 o'clock, right? So we could go over for a drink. So somebody took me over to Molly's, and I was like, man, this was like walking back in 1935, right? It had the old tin Barnum and Bailey circus advertisements they used to, nail up on walls, and the old tin ceiling and the old beautiful floor. And Molly was this gypsy, just stunningly cool woman who was probably early 80s at the time. And she'd sit behind the bar in a beautiful gypsy dress, and you could go up and buy her a drink. Now, an expensive drink in Superior was like $3.50. Right? That was top shelf. But I got to know Molly. It's because I used to play up here about every 3 months. And so I got to, every time I'd come up and play at KUMD, because KUMD is very nice, John Ziegler and me, wherever he is, I hope he's doing well, would always have me on. And I'd always go, make sure, wherever I was playing that night, make sure you meet us at Molly's after the gig. And so I always brought over a nice posse of people. And finally somebody told me, I said, Paul, Molly's is kind of considered the gay bar in the Twin Ports. And I go, well, a couple of things. I said, number one, that doesn't bother me. Number two, explains a lot of men in my audience when I come back up here. But by then it was a very welcoming, any race, creed, coalition, gender was always welcome. But it was actually one of the first gay bars in Superior when Molly opened it up as a single mother, divorced single mother in the 1950s. And kind of really ahead of its time when you think about it. And so years later, there's two stories here before I get to how I wrote the song. So years later, I'm reading at the Globe News. Is that still open? I hope so. Because I'd get all my little magazines and newspapers there. There was a guy, he was a cousin of Molly. He was a Douglas County sheriff. And he wrote a book about being a sheriff for 40 years in Douglas County. And there was 2 paragraphs about Molly's bar, his cousin Molly. And it said it was the only place where sailors, when they got off the ship, from wherever they're coming from, could eat, drink, and be merry. M-A-R-Y. Anyway, so I got to know Molly, and she had such a welcoming thing for all of us. whatever your persuasion was, you were welcome at Molly's. So, several years ago, I used to visit my sister who lived in Proctor. She'd put on occasionally Easter or Christmas, and all the family would meet there. All right, my sister Kathy Extel. And so I was up there for, I think it was either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And there was no bars open, and I had a good friend, John Hall, and a guy named Dick Blinn. Dick just passed, John passed. May they rest in peace. They said, hey, do you want to meet us at Molly's? And I go, yeah, sure, of course I want to meet you at Molly's. So I went there, and I just had a wonderful Christmas. Well, a few years later, the Southdale Mall, I think it was in 1990, was celebrating their 35th anniversary. The Southdale Mall in Edina was the first open-air shopping mall in America. And they were doing their anniversary, their 35th anniversary, and they put out a CD of Minnesota artists doing Christmas music as a giveaway during December. So I got a call at about 3 in the afternoon. And they said, yeah, Paul Metsa. Yeah, Paul Metsa. He goes, we're working on the CD. Somebody dropped out. We need one more song. I said, what's it for? They go, it's for a Christmas CD for Southdale. And I go, in my head, I'm going, do you know you're talking to freaking Woody Guthrie here, for Christ's sake? I wasn't that out front with him, but I'm kind of going, you're right, Paul Metsa, Southdale, makes perfect sense. So I go, well, I said, I'm not sure. I asked, but what does it pay? And they go, $2,500. I go, I think I've got one around here somewhere. So I went and I looked through. I mean, I've got song ideas on envelopes, electric bills, sickness bags from airliners. And I found the napkin that said Christmas at Molly's. Because I was there, I knew at some point this would be a song. So I wrote the song over the night, 12-verse song. It became one of my, at this time of year, one of my most requested songs. What I'm most proud of, I put out 12 records over the years. They've all gone linoleum. What I'm most proud about this was it ended up on the jukebox at Molly's Bar on Tower Avenue in Superior.
All right, I would like to say some thank yous before we share that video. Well, I want to just remind you, of course, that the Christmas at Molly's is in the book, and along with so many of your songs, Alphabet Jazz, Poetry, Prose, Stories, and Songs by Paul Metsa. And I also want to thank, what?
Tell them that you've got some for sale tonight.
Yes, we have books here, and Paul will sign them. So I want to thank you, Paul. I want to thank you for your stories. I want to thank you for writing the books. Now, of course, Blue Guitar Highway coming out in paperback, and Blood in the Tracks forthcoming, and then, of course, Alphabet Jazz out with, it's like a bonus beyond Blue Guitar Highway. So thanks again to Paul Metsa for appearing here on Live from the Heart, Songwriters, Storytellers series, and a big thank you to Mark Niklowski, Eric Swanson for running the sound, Jose Leon and the crew for video production, and thank all of you for joining us tonight. Live from the Heart is brought to you by Sacred Heart Music Center with support from the Minnesota Arts Board. You can visit sacredheartmusic.org to find out what's coming up at the Music Center. Information is available at the Sacred Heart Facebook page and Instagram pages. Do you want to play a little Leo Kaki and then maybe end with...
Play a little Kaki while they're running the credits, and then feel free to come up and say hi.
Well, we're going to play Christmas at Molly's maybe. If you want to play this tune, then we'll play the video. All right?
Or do you want to play this? You want Leo Kottke now?
Yeah, you can do
Okay,
Leo
great.
Kottke now, and then we'll hear Christmas at
All
Molly's.
right, here's this is called
Paul.
The Fisherman. Yabba dabba doo.
Of December is a stranger I walk like I just lost the keys to this city. As a sailor I've sent postcards round the world, but the picture tonight wasn't pretty. I walked in the shadows of haunted hotels like a miner trapped in a cavern. Well, I looked to the east and a star it shone down, and it led me right to Molly's Tavern. So I followed the footprints made in the snow by Salvation Army musicians. I got in line and I stood right behind a tap dancer and two blind magicians. You would have thought I had been there before as Molly stood there to greet me. 80 years old with a gleam in her eye, said you're expected and proceeded to seat me. Come on, you low down Lift up your low down ways, past the malt and the mistletoe. It's almost Christmas Day. I walked around and the harp player asked if I would like to request a selection. I smiled and I asked for God bless the child, and for him I took up a collection. I spotted a man with a white beard and red, from a distance looked just like Kris Kringle. As he went to the roof, oh, I thought I heard hoofs, and I swear I heard sleigh bells a jingle. We waltzed on a dance floor made out of glass. Between dances we sang Christmas carols. Then we lit candles, had a moment of silence. The bartender read F. Scott Fitzgerald. Molly said first we must give to receive. We put our trinkets into a kitty. In went my compass and my grandfather's watch, and I pulled out the key to the city. Come all you low down rounders, lift up your low down ways, past the malt and the mistletoe. It's almost Christmas Day. And so I guess if there's a lesson I've learned, it is one that will keep me from danger. Sometimes you get lost just so you will be found, and return the kindness to strangers. I explained how I felt as I kissed Molly's hand, like a miner freed from a cavern. Merry Christmas, baby, is what she said to me, but it's like this each night in my tavern. So I sail on the oceans and stare at the sky, and it seems like the whole world's on fire. And I just want to make angel wings in the snow and sing this song in that midnight choir. Come all you low down rounders, lift up your low down ways, past the malt and the mistletoe. It's almost Christmas Day. It's almost Christmas Day. It's almost Christmas Day. It's almost